Texas has a reputation for bigger hearts, bigger dreams, and, sometimes, bigger betrayals. Tonight's story isn't for the faint of heart. It's a raw, unfiltered look at a life that seemed perfect on the surface, only to be shattered by a secret so monstrous it forced one of Texas' top legal minds to take justice into her own hands. Before we dive in, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another true crime story that peels back the layers of deceit and betrayal. Our story begins with Jessica Hill, a brilliant defense attorney, a loving mother, and a woman admired throughout Texas for her unwavering commitment to justice. Jessica's fierce determination and charm lit up every courtroom, her every word echoing with the power of truth. And standing beside her was Mark Hill, a decorated Houston police officer whose steady presence and warm smile symbolized everything you'd expect from a hero in uniform. Their love story was one for the ages. They met at a charity gala in downtown Houston, two stars colliding in a city where ambition and duty intertwined. Jessica was immediately drawn to Mark's quiet confidence and genuine care for the community. He, in turn, was captivated by her sharp intellect and fearless passion for defending the innocent. Soon, their romance blossomed under the Texas sun, turning into a partnership that many envied. Their wedding was an affair of elegance and heartfelt promises, set in a historic chapel adorned with live music and cascading lights, with family and friends celebrating what seemed to be the perfect union. They built a life together that many only dreamed of. The Hills lived in a stately home with a red front door that symbolized courage and passion, where every corner was filled with evidence of their triumphs, degrees framed on the walls, accolades in the foyer, and, most importantly, the laughter of their beloved daughter, Ava. Born after years of heartbreak and loss, Ava was their miracle, a 14-year-old whose creativity and gentle spirit reflected the love and hope that once united her parents. For years, their life together was painted in broad strokes of devotion and success, a top lawyer championing justice in the courtroom, a dedicated cop serving his community, and a family that seemed to have it all. Every dinner was a celebration, every holiday a chapter in a living fairy tale. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues marveled at their connection, and for a long time, nothing could have signaled the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface. But as the saying goes in Texas, even the brightest stars can hide the deepest secrets. And this is where our story takes a fateful turn. They met in Austin, Texas, two stars rising fast in different skies. Jessica Vaughn was already making waves as a fierce criminal defense attorney with a reputation for dismantling prosecutions in courtrooms packed with tension and press. Mark Vaughn, a respected Houston cop, was just as formidable in his own right, known for his discipline, charm, and spotless record. Their paths crossed during a legal seminar where law enforcement and legal experts clashed and collaborated. What started as professional tension quickly turned into undeniable chemistry. By the end of the weekend, the two were inseparable. Their love story became a symbol in their community, an unlikely but powerful alliance between justice and the law. Mark was drawn to Jessica's brilliance, her unshakable poise under pressure, and the way she could look a jury in the eye and sway their hearts. Jessica loved Mark's strength, his sense of duty, and how his presence could quiet a room without a word. They were opposites, but they fit, two people who understood the world from different angles but wanted the same things: respect, stability, and a family rooted in love. After they married, they moved into a stunning brick home in an affluent Houston neighborhood. Jessica's practice expanded, landing her high-profile clients, media interviews, and a reputation that made her name ring through courtrooms across the state. Mark, meanwhile, rose to the rank of detective, admired for his sharp instincts and calm under fire. Together, they were a power couple, Texas royalty in a way that felt grounded and real. When Ava was born, everything changed. Jessica stepped away from the courtroom briefly to be present for her daughter's earliest years, though she couldn't stay away for long. They took turns parenting, trading off between late-night bottle feedings and early morning briefings. Mark was a doting father from the beginning, always ready to cancel plans just to be with his daughter. Jessica, while intense in her career, never let it overshadow her pride in being a mother. Ava was their everything. As Ava grew, so did their family rhythm. school drop-offs were followed by courthouse battles. Mark balanced his days solving cases with coaching Ava's soccer games on the weekends. Jessica made it a rule to be home for dinner every night, even if her workday ended in a storm of legal chaos. Their home echoed with laughter, debates, and the kind of loud, chaotic joy that only came from real love and deep connection. To their neighbors, friends, and even Ava's teachers, the Vaughns were the picture of perfection. Elegant Christmas cards, carefully planned vacations to Lake Travis, and family barbecues where Jessica would somehow still end up talking about court rulings between flipping burgers. Ava flourished in that environment, an honor roll student with a gift for writing and a quiet warmth that drew people to her. But then, slowly, the light began to dim. It was subtle at first. A missed dinner here, a cancelled trip there. Jessica noticed Mark's phone always seemed to be turned face down. Text messages arrived in the middle of the night with no names, just numbers. Ava, once bright-eyed and open, grew more reserved. Her smiles started to feel practiced. There were moments, fleeting but impossible to ignore, when Jessica would walk into a room and both Mark and Ava would go silent, sharing a glance that didn't sit right with her. Still, she pushed those thoughts aside. It was stress. It was the pressure of their careers. It was the teenage years. That's what she told herself. Because the alternative, that the two people she loved most were keeping something from her, was unthinkable. And yet, something was wrong. Jessica could feel it like a low hum under her skin, growing louder with each passing day. Jessica Vaughn had always trusted her instincts. They were the same instincts that had saved innocent clients from life sentences, that had read jurors like open books, that had sniffed out lies from behind smiling faces. But when it came to her own family, her own husband and daughter, she found herself hesitating. The truth began to reveal itself in fragments. A text Ava forgot to delete. A moment when Jessica walked into the living room and found Mark sitting far too close to their daughter, his hand quickly retreating when the door creaked open. A friend from Ava's school who casually mentioned how cool it was that Ava and her dad texted all the time, even late at night. It was like trying to catch smoke with her bare hands. The harder she tried to ignore it, the more suffocating it became. One evening, Jessica waited until everyone was asleep. She sat alone in the dark, her laptop screen glowing softly as she pulled Ava's phone records, cross-referenced them with Mark's, then began matching times, durations, and message volumes. Her hands trembled. She was staring down a truth she had once believed herself incapable of imagining. The late-night texts weren't professional. They weren't parental. And they weren't innocent. Jessica's body went cold. Her breath caught in her throat. She stood up, heart pounding so hard it felt like it would crack her chest open. She walked through the house like a ghost, passing family photos that now felt like lies frozen in time. Her husband, the man she trusted with her life. Her daughter, the child she gave up courtrooms for. Their betrayal, unfolding in the shadows of the same walls that once echoed with laughter. Still, she didn't confront them, not yet. She needed more. As a lawyer, she knew what it meant to build a case. And in her mind, this had become one. The next few days passed in eerie silence. Jessica watched them, studied them. The way Mark avoided her eyes. The way Ava kept to herself, flinching slightly when touched. The guilt was written all over both of them, and Jessica read it like a confession. The final blow came one night when Jessica returned home early from court. Jessica's heart hammered in her chest as she crept closer to Ava's room. She hadn't meant to see anything, but the strange quiet in the house had unsettled her, and the instinct in her gut told her something was off. The soft murmur of her husband's voice and the faint rustle of movement inside had drawn her in, each step carrying her closer to a nightmare she could never have imagined. As she reached the door, she paused. She didn't know why. Maybe it was fear of what she would find, maybe it was the flicker of hope that it was just her imagination playing tricks. But she couldn't stop herself. Slowly, almost silently, she turned the handle and pushed the door open just enough to peer inside. Mark was sitting on the edge of Ava's bed, his body angled toward her in a way that was far too intimate. His face, usually stern and professional, was soft, almost tender, as he gazed at their daughter. But it wasn't the softness that shattered her, it was the proximity. His hand rested on her cheek, gently brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Ava's eyes, wide and glistening, were locked on his, not with the innocent gaze of a child, but with something deeper, something that made Jessica's skin crawl. Jessica's hand tightened around the doorknob, her knuckles white. She wanted to scream, to burst into the room and tear them apart. But her body froze, rooted to the spot by the weight of the moment. She saw the way Mark's thumb stroked the side of Ava's face, slow and deliberate, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ava didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. Jessica's heart cracked as she looked at her daughter, her innocent, beloved daughter, sitting there so still, as if this moment were a normal part of their lives. Ava's face was tear-streaked, her eyes red and swollen, and yet she didn't seem to want to move away. As if the boundaries of trust had been erased long ago, and the man who was supposed to protect her, to guide her, was now the one to blur those lines. Mark's voice, low and soothing, came next, though it wasn't clear what he said. But it didn't matter. The damage was already done. The world around Jessica felt like it was crumbling, the foundation of everything she thought she knew about her husband and her family collapsing in on itself. And then, like a switch had flipped, everything became crystal clear. This wasn't the first time. This was more than a one-time mistake. This was a secret woven into their lives, hidden beneath the surface for months, maybe even longer. How many nights had they spent like this? How many hours had Mark whispered his secrets, his promises, his lies? And how had she never noticed? How had she let this happen right under her nose? The silence of the room became suffocating. Jessica could hear the faint echo of her own heartbeat in her ears, pounding louder, faster. Her legs felt like they might give out beneath her, but she couldn't look away. She couldn't move. Ava's soft gasp broke the tension, her gaze flickering toward the door, her eyes wide with fear. Mark's hand immediately retreated, his expression shifting to one of panic as he shot to his feet. But the damage was done. Ava looked at her mother, her face pale, her lips trembling. The quiet, broken voice that came from Jessica's throat wasn't a shout, wasn't a scream. It was simply a whisper, barely audible, "What is going on here?" Mark stood still, his eyes darting between Jessica and Ava, his chest heaving as he struggled to find words. Ava's hand shot up to cover her face, trying to hide the guilt, the shame, that she had carried all this time. Jessica's chest felt tight, a sharp pain in her ribs as the full weight of the betrayal crashed over her. Ava said nothing. Mark said nothing. Jessica could no longer keep herself steady. The house that had once been her sanctuary, her fortress, now felt like a prison. "Tell me it's not true," she whispered, her voice breaking as she stepped back, her head spinning, fighting to stay on her feet. The truth was undeniable. The room, the atmosphere, the looks exchanged between her daughter and her husband, it was all there, exposed and raw. This was no longer her family. This was no longer her life. Without another word, Jessica turned and walked away from the door, her legs trembling beneath her as she moved down the hallway, toward the bedroom where she had once slept beside the man she thought she knew. She reached the bedroom door, but it felt as if the room had been pulled out from beneath her. The walls closed in, and she could barely breathe. She didn't want to cry, didn't want to let the weakness show, but the tears came anyway, slipping down her face like a silent river. She sank down onto the edge of the bed, her knees weak, her hands trembling as she held her head in her palms. The room was eerily quiet. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound, a dull, mechanical noise that seemed to mock her. Mark hadn't followed her. She didn't know if he had even moved since she walked out. He had just stood there, like a deer caught in headlights, unable to form the words to explain himself. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to steady herself, but her mind wouldn't stop spinning. The image of him touching Ava, his hands on her, would be forever burned into her mind. She couldn't erase it. It was there, vivid and unrelenting. She knew she had to confront him. She had to hear him say the words, admit what he had done, and maybe, just maybe, understand why. But how could she look at him again, knowing what she knew? How could she trust him after everything? Her mind kept circling back to the same question: how long had this been going on? How much had he been hiding from her? But even more haunting was the look on Ava's face, the shame in her eyes, the fear. Ava hadn't spoken. She hadn't defended herself. That was the hardest part for Jessica to comprehend. Ava, her daughter, her baby girl, had been silent, complicit in a betrayal that she couldn't even begin to understand. Jessica's breath came in short bursts, as if she were suffocating. She stood abruptly, her legs shaking beneath her, and crossed the room to the window. She needed air. She needed space to think, but every part of her body felt like it was on fire. Mark stood in the doorway, the man she had once loved, the father of her children, the man who had shattered everything. "Jess, I can explain," his voice was shaky, but there was no conviction in his words. She didn't look at him. She couldn't. If she did, she feared she might collapse from the weight of it all. "Explain," she repeated quietly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "How do you explain this, Mark? How do you explain what I just saw?" Mark didn't answer right away. He took a few steps closer, but Jessica held her hand up in a clear gesture for him to stop. "No, don't come any closer," she said, her voice sharp now, tinged with an emotion she hadn't expected, rage. Mark didn't speak, but his eyes searched her face, desperately looking for any sign that she could forgive him. Any opening, any crack that might allow him to explain. You've been sleeping with our daughter, Mark," she said, her voice thick with disgust. "How do I explain that to myself, to my children, to anyone who will ever know? How do I go on knowing that the man I married, the father of my children," she couldn't finish the sentence. The words were too heavy. Jessica could feel her chest tightening, the weight of the situation crushing down on her. It felt like the air in the room was growing thinner with each passing second. "I'm so sorry, Jess. Please understand. I made a mistake," Mark pleaded, his voice growing frantic. "It's not what it looks like." "It's not what it looks like," she interrupted, standing now, turning to face him. "Mark, you were in her room, in her bed. You were touching her. How is that not exactly what it looks like?" Mark's face twisted, and for the first time, Jessica saw something she hadn't expected: shame. "I can't do this anymore," Jessica said, her voice breaking as she turned away from him, taking the first step toward leaving everything behind. She had made her decision. And there was no going back. Turning slowly, she faced Mark, who was still. Memory, a ghost from a time before everything shattered. "Mark," her voice was barely a whisper, the weight of her words nearly choking her. "How could you do this to us? To me? To our children?" Mark looked like he was on the verge of saying something, his lips moving but no words escaping. He took a step toward her, but she immediately stepped back, holding up a hand to stop him. "Don't. Just, don't come any closer," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of fury and heartbreak. The silence that followed felt suffocating. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said, his voice barely audible. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I didn't mean for this to happen." Jessica scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "A mistake? Mark, you don't accidentally sleep with your 14-year-old daughter. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And now we're all paying for it." The words stung like acid, and Jessica could see the impact they had on him. His face twisted with shame, but it wasn't enough. She needed more than guilt. She needed justice. She needed something to make this right, but she knew nothing could. You think I don't feel guilty? You think I'm not sorry? Mark's voice cracked, his hands reaching out as if he were trying to touch her, to hold her. But Jessica stepped back again, shaking her head. You don't get to feel sorry, Mark. You've betrayed me. You've betrayed our children. You've ruined everything. The finality in her voice left no room for argument. She was done. This was it. The life they had once shared was over. Mark looked at her, his face a mixture of fear and sorrow. Jessica, please. We can fix this. I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Please, don't walk away from me. Jessica shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes once more. But this time, it wasn't just sadness. It was a burning fury, a deep rage that had been building since the moment she first walked into that room. I've already walked away, Mark, she said, her voice cold and unwavering. I don't know who you are anymore. And I can't live with that. There was a long pause, a silence that seemed to stretch on forever. And then, without another word, Jessica turned and walked out of the room, out of the house, and into the life that would never be the same. She found herself back at the house before she even realized it. The weight of the anger pressing against her chest had driven her straight to the door without thinking. And there she stood, staring at the familiar house that had once been a symbol of safety, of love, now a place filled with nothing but lies. She hesitated for a moment before walking through the door. There was no one else here. It was just her and the ghost of what had been. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and she could feel her hands trembling at her sides. But then, she heard it, the soft sound of Mark's breathing from their bedroom. He was asleep. He had no idea what had just happened, no idea that everything had changed. Jessica's breath hitched as she walked toward the bedroom, her footsteps almost silent in the house. She paused at the door, watching him from the threshold. Mark lay there, completely unaware of the storm raging inside her. He looked peaceful, almost serene, as if nothing had ever gone wrong. His face was relaxed, his chest rising and falling with every breath. But to Jessica, it was a mockery. A perfect illusion that had been shattered beyond repair. She stood there, frozen, watching him sleep. It was like the calm before the storm, and in that moment, something snapped. She felt a cold wave wash over her, her thoughts clearer than ever before. The rage that had been boiling inside her, the betrayal that had consumed her, all collided in a single, horrifying realization. This man, the man she had loved, the man she had trusted, was no longer the person she had once known. And in that moment, she knew what she had to do. She crossed the room silently, her heart pounding so loudly it seemed to drown out everything else. Mark's breathing continued, deep and steady, unaware of the nightmare that was about to unfold. She stood over him for a long moment, watching, waiting. And then, in a swift motion, her hands moved. She grabbed the nearest object, something heavy, something sharp, and without a second thought, she brought it down on him. The force of her actions felt almost surreal, like she was watching someone else carry out this twisted fate. But it was her. It was her fury. Her heartbreak. Her betrayal. Mark's body jerked awake, but it was too late. Jessica held on, pushing the weight of her anger and pain into each strike. Her mind was numb to everything except the need for release, the need for justice. She didn't know how long it lasted. It felt like an eternity, but it was over quickly. Mark was still. His body limp, no longer the man she had once known, no longer the man who had torn her world apart. Jessica stood there, breathing heavily, her hands shaking. There was no going back now. No escaping the reality of what she had just done. Jessica took a long, slow breath, glancing at Mark one last time before turning and walking out of the room. The house felt suffocating, and she needed to get away from it. Away from the evidence, away from the life that was now nothing but a distant memory. Her mind raced as she stepped outside, the cool night air hitting her like a wave. The streets were quiet, the world unaware of the chaos that had unfolded behind closed doors. But Jessica knew that she could never return to the life she once knew. Not after this. As she stood there, lost in her own thoughts, the sound of sirens in the distance began to grow louder. Her pulse quickened. It wouldn't be long before the truth caught up with her. She knew she had to act fast, to cover her tracks, to protect the one thing that still mattered, the children. But even as the panic began to creep back into her chest, she couldn't help but feel something else. Something darker. With one final glance at the house, Jessica turned and walked away, her mind set on the road ahead. There would be no turning back, no going back to the woman she had been before. She was a different person now. And nothing, not even the law, could change that. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room as the judge, a middle-aged man with a stern face, called the trial to order. Jessica Hills sat in the defendant's chair, her posture stiff, eyes straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap. Her heart pounded in her chest, and the weight of everything that had happened bore down on her. Across from her, Mark's family sat in a huddle, their eyes filled with judgment and sorrow. They had once welcomed Jessica into their lives with open arms, but now, after everything that had transpired, they looked at her as if she were a stranger. Her defense attorney sat beside her, speaking softly to her from time to time, trying to comfort her. He had been with her through every step of this process, but no words could ease the pain of what had happened. The prosecutor stood up, his sharp voice cutting through the tense silence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here today because of one horrific act. Jessica Hills, a woman who once vowed to protect her family at all costs, is now accused of taking the life of her husband, Mark." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The prosecutor continued, recounting the tragic night when Jessica found Mark sleeping, unaware that his life was about to end. In a moment of blind rage, Jessica returned to the house, where she found her husband lying peacefully in bed. In that moment, she took the life of the man who had once been her partner, the father of her children. But as the prosecutor's words washed over the room, they barely registered for Jessica. The pain of what had happened seemed too much to bear. She had walked into that room months ago and discovered the truth. Mark, her husband, the man she loved and trusted, had been having an affair with their 14-year-old daughter. The betrayal was unfathomable. The crime, unspeakable. Mark's betrayal wasn't just about an affair. It was a violation, a breach of trust so deep that it shattered everything Jessica had known. Her defense attorney stood, interrupting the prosecutor. "Objection, Your Honor. The prosecutor is jumping to conclusions. This is about Jessica's actions that night, not the past." The judge nodded, silencing the prosecutor. The defense lawyer turned to the jury, his voice calm and composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, Jessica Hills did not act out of premeditated malice. What happened that night was an explosion of grief, anger, and years of built-up pain. She was a mother and a wife, deeply hurt by the man she trusted most in this world." The defense lawyer paused, glancing at Jessica. Her eyes met his, filled with both sorrow and resolve. "She is not a cold-blooded killer. She was a woman pushed beyond her limits. A woman who was betrayed by the very person she trusted, the person who should have protected her and their children." Jessica couldn't stop the tears from welling up. She was no longer angry, the pain had settled deep inside her. What she had done could never be undone, and the realization of that still felt like a heavy weight on her chest. But she wasn't the villain. She had been wronged too. The prosecutor stood again, his tone harsh. "The law does not condone murder, no matter the circumstances. Jessica Hills took a life, and now she must pay the price for her actions." Jessica's heart raced, but she forced herself to sit still. The words from the prosecutor stung, but she knew she was not the only one at fault. Mark's crime, the affair with their daughter, had led them down this tragic path. Mark had betrayed everything they had built together. It was his choices that had brought them to this courtroom, but Jessica had crossed a line too. The jury would soon deliberate, and Jessica could only wait, knowing that her fate was in their hands. The truth was messy, and nothing would ever make it right. But for the first time in months, Jessica felt a small flicker of hope, that the truth might come out, and she might finally get the chance to heal. The courtroom was heavy with silence as the jury deliberated. Jessica sat in her seat, hands folded tightly in her lap. The sound of the ticking clock on the wall was the only noise, each second dragging by like an eternity. She had long since stopped hoping for a different outcome. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jessica Hills, guilty of second-degree murder. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, cold and final. Jessica's heart sank, but she had already known what was coming. She had taken a life. Jessica Hills, you have been found guilty of second-degree murder. The court sentences you to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The words were as cold as the steel bars she would soon face. Jessica's face remained impassive, though her mind raced. 25 years, a lifetime to pay for the actions that had come from years of betrayal, pain, and grief. As the gavel fell, Jessica was led away by the bailiff, her eyes meeting the jury one last time. They had done their duty, but she knew that no one could truly understand the depths of her pain. They saw a woman who had killed her husband. But she was much more than that. She was a mother, a wife, a daughter, caught in the throes of a nightmare that no one should ever have to endure. Thank you for watching this deeply disturbing and emotional story. Jessica Hill's tragic journey is a haunting reminder of the devastating consequences of betrayal, secrets, and broken trust. But it's also a cautionary tale, one that asks us to think about the fragile nature of the lives we build and the deep scars that can be left when those we love betray us. We want to hear your thoughts. Was Jessica's reaction justified? Or did she go too far in her pursuit of justice for her children? Leave a comment below with your opinion, and if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more gripping true crime stories like this one.